Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join our session today. My name is Carolyn Anger. I'm a Senior Director at Consilio and President of the Toronto chapter of ACEDS. Before we get into our agenda, please connect with us if you are in the Toronto or Ontario region and want to know more about ACEDS and our Toronto chapter. You can connect with us via email at toronto@aceds.org, on Twitter @ACEDSToronto, or by visiting our webpage at toronto.aceds.org. At this time, I would like to thank Consilio for generously sponsoring today's event. This is our second and final webinar in the series on Microsoft 365 for corporate law departments. Once again, we have a stellar lineup on this panel planned for you, so let's get started. After introductions to our panel, we'll briefly cover an overview of our last session, and then we'll dive into eDiscovery at Microsoft. We'll wrap up with some final Q&A, but if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box throughout, and we will address them through the session. I'm happy to introduce our incredible speakers who are all experts in their respective fields, starting with Jennifer Knox. Jennifer is a director in the Consilio Consulting Group. Her broad data analytics and eDiscovery expertise includes technical product and service delivery, largely in the financial services space. In these roles, she works closely with legal, records management, and information security teams to drive legal and IG technology strategy, all while protecting critical enterprise information. And if you attended our last session, where our speakers shared a fun fact about themselves, you will know that Jennifer is undefeated in making the world's best banana bread. Rachi Messing. Rachi is a senior program manager at Microsoft in the corporate, external, and legal affairs department based out of their Israel office. In his current role, he works to promote and manage the usage of advanced technology solutions, allowing the eDiscovery team to be efficient and effective in handling their active docket. Formerly part of the Equivio management team, he joined Microsoft through the acquisition in January 2015, where he spent 3 years working in the Office 365 Information Protection Product Group, managing their eDiscovery, data governance, and compliance features. And a fun fact about Rachi is that his first job ever was working in the Orioles Memorial Stadium, which allowed him to watch every Orioles home game for 2 years. Our third speaker is Nick Robinson. Nick is a principal program manager in the Microsoft 365 security compliance and management team focused on the eDiscovery solutions area. Nick brings experience in product marketing, consumer experience, and product management to his role, helping to define features that will help customers reduce the time and cost associated with common eDiscovery workflows. And during our last session, Nick shared that earlier this year, he had the opportunity to hike up and then ski down Mount Adams amid the heat waves that overtook the Pacific Northwest this past summer. And now, on to the show. I will hand the mic over to Jennifer, Nick, and Rachi.
Thanks, Carolyn. This is Jen, and if you stick around through the end of this call, I'll give you the secret to the world's greatest banana bread. Like Carolyn said, we're going to do a brief recap of the trend analysis that Nick and I presented in our previous session, and then we'll be handing the mic over to Rachi to talk through his role at Microsoft and how Microsoft is utilizing the 365 tools. So our key trends that we discussed last time can be bucketed into kind of a few areas, right? The sort of extreme upward curve of cloud collaboration tools, Teams Chat, Teams channels, and sites, the explosion there over the course of 2020 and the pandemic, and how folks are kind of responding to requests that could include those data types, right? So the eDiscovery impacts of the rollout of Teams over the last couple of years has definitely been a key trend, something I talk about quite frequently. And then additionally, there's been a move towards kind of a more holistic approach for eDiscovery. Folks adopted 365 for a variety of reasons, right? For centralization of IT efforts, cost savings, risk reduction, all those good reasons that people adopted 365. And people are now familiar enough with the core eDiscovery tool and some of the basic tools that they're thinking about how can I take these business processes to the next level? What other tools do I need in my toolbox to attack a different kind of matter? And how can I make the end-to-end eDiscovery process best in breed or just full of best practices across the gamut of my matters? And additionally, kind of part and parcel to that second item, there's been a real focus in the conversations I've had in 2021 around simplifying and improving, right? Centralizing technology stack, automating eDiscovery business processes, and increasing scale and speed in a variety of areas, right? Making sure that you can meet all of your obligations to preserve information, to retain information, and how best to handle all of those functions in a concise way. Nick, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, no, that's great, Jennifer. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add a few thoughts around some of the trends we've been seeing, some of the things we've been hearing from some of our best, most mature adopted customers, to also organizations who are thinking about doing more with eDiscovery in Microsoft 365. And it's really follows kind of what you were saying around, hey, there's this kind of collaboration explosion. And, as we've seen kind of this digital transformation take place that you've probably heard Microsoft talk about before, in the last 2 years, it's really accelerated for a variety of reasons. And so, of course, remote work contributes to that in a big way. And what we're hearing from customers is, that data explosion that we've been anticipating is really taking place now within Microsoft 365. So customers are looking for, a set of tools that's kind of in place to help them be efficient with that amount of data, that's just kind of growing every day, in place before it's kind of taken outside of the system for further, management in the process. And so, with Advanced eDiscovery, we're really excited to see this kind of confluence of both that collaboration in the cloud, as well as the tool set to kind of manage that set of data. And so I think some of the pieces we have here around automation, scale, and speed, having an end-to-end workflow, really mirror kind of what we've been hearing from customers around their top priorities as well.
And really quickly, before we hand the reins over to Rachi, we had a couple open questions from last session that we didn't get to in the chat or Q&A around training and documentation. So we'll be sharing these slides after the presentation. That's why there's links here. But there is robust 365 eDiscovery documentation out on Microsoft Docs. And there's a page that starts you off on the workflows for core, a page that starts you off on Advanced eDiscovery. And those are going to help you with what do I do next? How do I do this process? And if you're looking for a little bit more targeted training or feedback, or customized documentation or customized training program, Microsoft is offering that through their partner network. And you can reach out to any of the panelists here to get further information on that. And with that, I will hand over to Rachi.
Thanks, Jen. So today, what we wanted to really focus on for the majority of the session is eDiscovery at Microsoft. So this is talking about how we, from our corporate legal department, as an eDiscovery practitioner, how are we actually making use of these tools? The good, the bad, the ugly. What things work? What things do we have to think about? What things do we have to supplement with? All of those different types of things. And this is absolutely not to say this is the only way or this is the way that eDiscovery utilizing the M365 environment has to be done, but more about the art of the possible. It's more about what are some of the things that we are doing and that we've learned over our time of using these tools that might be helpful to you. So let's jump right in. And the first thing, if we can jump to the next slide, is really about the fact that you know, the in-place story and thinking about things in place is really what it comes down to, and this is really the fundamental mind shift that has to take place, and you have to think about things slightly different when you're doing things in place. And there's a number of reasons for that. And Jen, if you don't mind building out the rest of that slide, you know, there's a bunch of different things that come with doing things in place. From a risk perspective, everything that we're doing, you know, we are the custodians overall of Microsoft data, our users' data. We need to do everything that we can in order to keep that data as safe as possible. One of the things that our team is like many corporate legal departments is very conscious of is the costs of these activities, and doing everything that we can in order to make sure that our costs are to minimum, and we'll talk a bit about that. And then really efficiency. How do we scale with a small team? We'll get into the team dynamic there. How are we able to do all of this? We need to. The only way we're able to accomplish all of these things is by doing it, by taking away everything, send it out to a vendor or to other tools, but really looking at how do we where the data lives. Let's take a look at the next slide. Is a little bit about why we had to think about it that way, why we had to do it. So we know that data is growing, and talk actual numbers around that. The actual volume of data that we collect on a daily basis from our custodians continues to grow. And as that data continues to grow, we found as we first started to try to just push all the data out, what we found was it became impossible. It's no longer a case where we can just go and plug a hard drive into a server and copy everything off of the Exchange server. We are reliant on the internet, and on, you know, that's part of what comes with being in a cloud environment. So just trying to push all that data out as quickly as possible becomes very difficult when you're dealing with eDiscovery at scale. So part of what we're doing in order to avoid that choke point, in order to make sure that we are able to do everything in the time frame that we need to do it, is doing as much as we can in place. And on the next slide, we can see just what we're doing in place versus what we're doing outsourced still. Everything that you can see, this is the typical EDRM model. Everything that you can see in the blue are the things that we are doing in place, that we're doing using the tools within M365 in order to accomplish them where the data lives. And you can see that on the review side, it's kind of shaded partially a little bit blue and mostly dark where we outsource it. And that is because on the vast majority of our cases, the large litigation, we are still using third-party review tools for the actual structured review of the data. But we are able to take advantage of some of the M365 review capabilities on the smaller cases, on the investigations, on the things where you know, we've just got a couple hundred, a couple even thousand items that have to be looked at, or that have to be sliced and diced a little bit more in order to make a determination of what it is that's going on. We use it for ECA. We use it for a lot of these different types of activities quite successfully. But when it comes to the large scale review, that is absolutely still being done outside of the M365 environment, which is why the vast majority of the review piece here is in dark blue. On the next slide, we'll talk through a little bit about what that, everyone talks about the explosive growth in data. And here you can actually see the impact that has happened with data on our users. If you go back about 12, 13 years ago, the average custodians, this is only custodian-based data that the custodian is actually generating, meaning not system files, not anything like that, but the data that they are actually generating that is user data that is potentially, could be relevant, that has to be searched through, that has to be analyzed in order to determine its relevancy. On average, our custodians had 4 gigs of data. Today, we saw a massive explosive growth over the last year and a half, where, as people are doing more and more at home, we found that they're just generating a lot more data, especially the use of Teams, much more use of SharePoint and other tools. We're averaging 140 gigs of data per custodian. Now, at the same time that we've seen this massive explosion of growth in data, our team has gone from the full outsource model where, we were exporting everything out, sending it out to a vendor. Then we went to the in-source part of it where we were still exporting out full mailboxes, full sites, whatever it might be, and processing it in-house, to the let's use core eDiscovery for the actual searching and initial culling, and then the adoption of advanced eDiscovery. And what you can see is from a cost perspective, on a per custodian basis, this isn't our overall cost. This is comparing the costs of a custodian, what it costs to process their data and through the entire process, including review, at the beginning, 10 to 12 years ago, versus now when we're using advanced eDiscovery, we save over 80% in our costs. And that's by utilizing the tools in place that are available and still using tools like relativity and other review tools where needed, as well as managing our errors through the processing stages as well, which we'll talk a bit about. So let's keep going and take a look at what are the things that we're doing. So we're absolutely, within advanced eDiscovery, you have the ability to do the custodian management. You have the ability to actually have deep processing. So not just what the standard Microsoft 365 search index is able to do. With advanced eDiscovery, it layers on top of it the ability to actually, process a lot more file types and a lot deeper into those files. So you have fewer errors through the processing phase. The ability to review and manage the case data within those individual cases, but most importantly is the ability to use those various different analytics to help you to cull down the data. So all of these things we'll talk a little bit in depth. Let's go to the next slide. So I said I'd mention a little bit about our team. Our team is structured like many corporate eDiscovery teams are in terms of the corporate legal department. In our litigation team, we have 11 attorneys who are managing the outside counsel and overseeing the overall case strategy. But then really the paralegals and the associate paralegals are empowered to do a whole lot. They really are involved in the day-to-day. They're involved in everything that is happening in a case, from strategy, working together with the attorneys on the strategy, to actually, which custodians are going to be involved, what search terms are going to actually be utilized, working hand in hand with the attorneys, with outside counsel, and with the eDiscovery team. So the eDiscovery team, as you can see, we have a pretty small team when you think about the amount of litigation that Microsoft does. We have 5 people who are in the department who are the eDiscovery program managers, of which only 3 of them are full-time involved in casework. The other 2 are partially, do handle some casework, but that's not their only jobs. We also have 2 engineers, which is something that we started about a year and a half ago because we were doing a lot of custom engineering ourselves, and we decided to actually put some more structure around it. And we found that by adding on a dedicated engineer to everything from managing, the scripts and the processes that we're doing, but we do a lot of things outside of M365, a lot of things that we need to manage and need to handle, everything from how we're doing our collections outside of M365, how we're managing our code reviews, because we do a lot of code reviews with outside counsel. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and that's what a lot of what the engineers do. But you can see it is a pretty small team for the volumes and the scale that we're doing it at. And if we go to the next slide, we can see exactly what that scale looks like. Our average case starts off with 2.5 terabytes of data that gets put on hold. And that is data that's being placed on hold using advanced eDiscovery in place. Once we scope it down, that 1.4 terabytes of data, that's the data that would have had to have been exported out in order to search it. That's the data that we are actually running search terms against, that we're running all kinds of date ranges, other metadata screens against. And on a typical case, we are able to reduce that volume by 98%. Our average case gets about 30 gigs of data that would be resultant of all of those different culling steps. And one of the nice things is, because of the fact that that data is preserved and it's in place, it's sitting there, is even if we have to go back again and again and again, that data is going to be there. It's still going to be available. It's still going to be able to be searched, to be revised. And if we have to, we can always come back and redo these searches, redo any culling, add any data or remove data as needed. But then the analytics allow us to cut out almost 50% of that data. And the data that's actually going into our hosting platform is typically only about 15 gigs. So from a cost perspective, even in these really large cases, we're able to drastically reduce the amount of data that is actually going into the reviews that we're paying on a per gig basis, the hosting fees, and then obviously that helps us to reduce our user fees and all of the other associated fees that come along with it. The less data that you're putting into the review process, the cheaper it's going to be, the more money that you're going to be able to save. Now, all of this has to obviously be done in a defensible manner, in a way that we're able to actually manage this. So let's go to the next slide and see a little bit more about what we're doing in terms of the scale.
Hey, Rachi, while you do that, just
yep.
wanted to interject real quick and just say, this is such a amazing kind of flow of that data volume and what you're able to do. One of the questions that came in, that'd be great to just have your quick perspective on, is core and advanced and E3 versus E5 and what you're able to achieve and how you kind of look at those two different solutions in your toolkit as you execute these workflows.
Yeah, it's a great question because it is something that we get asked a lot, and it's also something that we've had to think about a lot. Today, all of our searching, everything is being done in advanced eDiscovery. Now, advanced eDiscovery, the first stage of advanced eDiscovery is utilizing those same workload searches that are available within the E3 platform. So, a lot of these things in terms of the slicing and dicing of the data, the preservation of the data, the ability to run search terms, the ability to report on them, you are able to do it using the E3 tools. And that's something that we've done we did for a long time. The reason why we've moved all of it now into advanced eDiscovery is because with the advanced eDiscovery, especially, I talked about the deep indexing, the ability to handle more file types, the ability to handle larger files where a lot of the search limitations are expanded. Obviously, any system you're going to have limitations, and it's really super important to know and understand what those limitations are. And it's all well documented in terms of what you are able to search, what you're not able to search. But it's really, it's the ability to expand that and make it as wide as possible in terms of, making sure that you're not missing things, and that you don't have to do that much work outside of the M365 environment to reconcile and resolve a lot of those errors. That's why we've moved into using the advanced eDiscovery tools. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't errors, and it doesn't mean that there aren't things that you need to do in order to make sure that you're having a full defensible process. And I'll go a little bit more into detail on those. But really, it's about how, by using the advanced eDiscovery, which is the E5 tool set, it does give you a much deeper, a much more defensible, easier to handle and easier to manage that defensibility in our opinion. And that's why we've made that switch over to using advanced eDiscovery even for the core searches. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And on this slide, we'll see, Jen, if you could, there we go. On the preservation side, I mentioned the fact that we do things outside of M365. Today, Microsoft, obviously, because we're Microsoft, our users tend to use the tools and use as much as they can of the M365 environment. And what we do in general is when we have the start of a case, we will start it off by when a user gets added to our hold system, and they are notified or not notified, depending on the case and whether it's a silent hold or it's a actual hold notice is issued. We will go ahead and automatically put a number of their locations on hold. Now, there are a number of locations that we will not automatically put on hold. So, for example, we'll put their email on hold, we'll put their OneDrive on hold, we'll put their Teams chats, the one-on-one chats or one-to-many chats that they have, all of those automatically get preserved. But if they have a Teams group, a team, like, the group that they're in, with channel chats, those do not automatically get put on hold in most cases. And that is because a member of a team, they might be a member of 30, 50, 70 different teams, and of which they are not necessarily going to be relevant. So we do still make use of custodian questionnaires. We still make use of the various different tools to figure out which sites, which teams they actually are potentially relevant to the case, and which ones then need to be placed on hold and need to be preserved. So that's the reactive side of things. And the same thing with SharePoint sites. There's no reason, and everyone is a member of our intranet site, the general Microsoft intranet site that's built on SharePoint. Well, we are not going to put that on hold for every person who gets put into a litigation and gets a hold placed on them. There's also plenty of data that we're still collecting from outside, and we still need to manage that data and integrate that data into our cases and make sure that it is properly preserved. Let's go to the next slide. So from a process standpoint, this is a simplified view of what the eDiscovery process looks like using advanced eDiscovery. In general terms, we're searching that data, we're processing the data into what's called a review set, where all of the data will be expanded out, all the emails, attachments, zip files, everything. If I have a PST file, for example, that's collected from a non-Microsoft 365 data source, I can upload that into the case, and all of that data will be extracted and go through full processing. We have a data remediation process where we determine whether or not we are going to actually remediate some of the data, or if we're just going to push it off to later in the process. And then it goes through the analytics, which is the near duplication, the email threading, themes analysis, where we are then able to either do a review on that data. If it's a small little case, we are able to apply predictive coding in place if it's a larger case. And then that data gets exported out. And I know that there's been some questions around export speeds and export limits. In general terms, even with the volumes that we're dealing with, the number of cases that we deal with on an annual basis or a daily basis, we generally do not run into the export limits because of the fact that we're doing so much culling in place. The daily limits of export are, they're there because in order to not overtax the system, they are able to be raised on a limited time basis. So if you have a emergency regulatory matter where you absolutely need to get, 50 terabytes out, and you're gonna properly plan that out and look at how you're gonna export that data, you can raise those limits. You're still gonna have bandwidth constraints and things like that, but overall, it allows you to get the data out that you need to get out. And then that data is then goes into the review tool. Now, one of the key points here is that when we export our data out, it's already processed. It already has all the text extracted. It has all the metadata and load file. It's ready to go and ready to be loaded up into that review tool. So that way we don't have to pay for any additional processing. We don't have to go ahead and go through, any additional costs in order to get that data ready and loaded into the review tool. We typically just pay data tech time in terms of what actually has to be moved in, but the vendors that we use are using as much automation as possible to even limit that in terms of what has to happen there. And then it goes through any review and any production that needs to happen. So it's a pretty simple, streamlined flow. But the idea is that it's flexible enough that we're able to do all of this in a way that's repeatable, and a lot of it we are able to automate, and we'll get into a little bit of detail on that.
Hey, Rachi.
Was there a question? Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to jump in real quick. There's kind of some questions in the Q&A, just kind of saying, hey, how can I make exports run faster? And if I'm hearing you correctly, what I think you're saying is, hey, that's not as big of a pain point now for us as it may have been before. With the process you're using in advanced eDiscovery, we're actually minimizing data before you take it out, so you get to a more reasonable size of export. Is that right? Is that the right way to interpret that, or how would you kind of respond to that?
That's generally correct. Now, we do absolutely, there are times, we just recently had a massive case where we actually did have to export out terabytes of data. And one of the things that we did was we made sure that everyone was fully ready for what the timeframes would be based off of how long that data does take to export out. If you're using core eDiscovery, there are some things that you can do in terms of, the core eDiscovery export uses what's called the export tool. It's a web app that actually gets downloaded and runs on your desktop and manages the export. There are some things that you can do, and it's documented in the Microsoft Docs about how to expand the number of threads that it uses, which will speed it up a bit. But in the advanced eDiscovery, what it's doing is it's actually packaging the data and putting it into an Azure container, which then you download that data from the Azure container, or you move it from Azure to Azure. And on that, you are really just constrained by how much bandwidth is available. So there's not a whole lot that you can really do there to speed it up. And you're at the mercy of what that is. And again, you need to make sure that from your individual environment, you have a good knowledge of what kinds of speeds you're going to see, what kinds of bandwidth is available, and what you're able to do to make that run as fast as possible. But we will, Nick, if you're able to maybe post the help doc around adding threads on the export tool, then that might be able to help if someone has a question on core eDiscovery.
Sure.
Let's go ahead into the next slide. And this is really the meat of what we are doing on a daily basis. So here you can see this is kind of laying out the overall process and what tools we are using for different stages. And what you can see here is we are not just using M365, whether it be core or AED, throughout the entire thing. On the hold notices, we are still using a third-party application. It's hosted in Azure, but we use that to send the actual notice and to keep track and send the reminders and all of those types of things. We're hoping sometime in the next year, if hopefully everything goes well in terms of the development and some of the things that are still underway from a roadmap perspective, in order to get us moved over into M365 as well for using the hold notices there, including the ability to track some of our historical holds, things like that, that we want to have a single source of truth for our holds that we can go to, we can query, and we can make sure that we know exactly what is on hold or was on hold or is no longer on hold. But once that is done, we actually then every day we generate a list from that application of all the people who are either now on hold or have been removed from a hold, and we're able to then automate the ability to place the holds in M365. Now, a lot of that, if we need to, we can always go in. If there's an emergency hold, someone, is leaving, we have suspicion that someone is going to delete data right away, we can go in and manually do that within the user interface. But on a regular basis, that is automated in order to make sure that it's done properly, that we're able to make sure that all of those things that we talked about on the preservation slide earlier are automatically placed on hold. When we do need to do local collections, we are not using, in general, third-party software in terms of Ncase or FTK or anything like that. We're using a series of PowerShell scripts that we've built that incorporate off-the-shelf Microsoft tools in order to be able to properly and defensively copy that data and place it into our litigation archive, which is a Azure-based archive that we've custom built, that is able to store all the data, it's able to track all the data, it's able to even do some basic deduplication, hashing, et cetera, that we're able to know who was collected, what matter they were collected for, how often they've been collected, what subsequent collections they've had done, what mailboxes have been, or data, email data has been collected from local PSPs, things like that. That we're able to upload into that Azure archive and make sure that it's being properly tracked, and that it can go into the advanced eDiscovery process when it needs to. We're able to then do all of our searching within advanced eDiscovery. That's keyword searching, metadata searching, et cetera, and that is a highly iterative back and forth between counsel over and over again. We do things with PowerShell and using the APIs in order to be able to automate a lot of that, in order to make sure, for example, if I have to do 70 different variations of searches against 35 different custodians, yes, that would take a while, and it would be a pretty tedious process to do that manually. We're able to automate a lot of that through the process. The processing, the deep indexing we talked about, and really what it comes down to now is, you can see in the remediation stage, we used to have about 2% of our data would be unindexed, would actually require remediation. With the advanced eDiscovery tool set and the deep indexing, we've gotten that down to 0.07% of the items that are still unindexed. And in truth, a lot of those aren't even in the 2% in the quote unquote olden days. A lot of that didn't mean that it was fully unindexed. It meant that part of an item wasn't indexed, and it still needed to be remediated. It still needed to make sure that we were able to fully search the item. But today, we are able to reduce that volume down by a lot in order to make sure that we don't have to spend a lot of time remediating that data. And a lot of times the volume is so small that we will just push it out to our vendor and have them do that processing, because it's not going to cost that much and it's going to be such a small volume. We run our analytics, as I mentioned, the near duplication, the threading themes, to help us further reduce the data. And then if it's a small case, we will actually do that review in M365. utilizing the review tools there. Quite frankly, the review tools have come a long way in the last year and a half. They still have a while to go. They are definitely not, as good as some of the eDiscovery tools that have been around for 10, 15 years. But they do the job. They are definitely at the stage today where they are good enough. They're able to actually be able to do your basic tagging. You're able to do your basic searching. You're able to do filtering, sorting, those types of things in order to, if you've got a small set of data with one person, two people having to go in and look at it, you are able to accomplish what you need to accomplish within that data set. If it's anything bigger, it'll go through the export stage where it'll come out exported in a fully processed state. But then we do some post-export processing where we do additional data suppression. One of the things to be aware of is that within the advanced eDiscovery review set, when it extracts the data, it fully extracts everything. So included in that are a lot of the embedded objects, a lot of the GIF images, those types of things, which are already included in the natives of the parent item. Now, the text, a lot of times, if it's OCR, will be in a separate text file. So we do some post-processing that will combine those in order to just have one file as opposed to 3 or 4 or 7 files, making sure that the text is properly in the right file. Because if it's viewable within the actual native file and within the extracted metadata is there, then as long as the text is there, then we feel comfortable enough passing on just the parent and not all of the individual embedded objects, as long, again, as it's fully viewable and you're able to see it. So we do some additional suppression. We do some data comparisons. For example, we even though we aren't dealing with a lot of system files or anything like that, we do run the NIST list against the data in order to do data comparisons there. We're able to do some basic priv checks to see if data was previously exported and reviewed and had been marked priv, all kinds of things in order to further reduce that volume. And then we get it to the stage where then it actually goes out and gets reviewed. Okay, Nick, any questions that came in?
Yeah, it's great stuff, Rachi. So there's one question I think it'd be really good to get your perspective on. Jennifer says, hey, if we're using advanced eDiscovery, how do you recommend we approach exporting out unindexed items so they can be filtered in a different tool? Still trying to figure that out. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so you've got a couple things that you can do there, and some of it depends on some of the search techniques that you're using. If you're going ahead and you are bringing in by date range or something like that, then you will get all of that data into the review set, and then you can go ahead and, first of all, you can filter out within the review set based off of the processing state. So you are able to do some things that way. There's also the processing tab within Advanced eDiscovery that will list out all of the data that had errors. You can go ahead and export that data, remediate it, and then optionally, depending on how you're doing that remediation, you can then either re-upload it back in and it'll replace the originals, or you can just do the searching there and then just handle it outside the Advanced eDiscovery toolset. So it really does depend on at what stage and exactly what you're doing and what you want to do with that data. A lot of the data that we have that is in that unindexed data set is data that is encrypted outside of Office 365. Through and then either do additional searching or just pass it on, as I said, because a lot of times it's such a small volume, we'll pass it on and then it'll go through and get reviewed.
Awesome. I think you cut out there a little bit for me, but I think that was an awesome answer to kind of pull some of these things through. Let's see, there's a couple other questions here around Published benchmarks, we can share the documentation on that. Any tip on collection of custodians running keyword searches to limit sizes because the search is pulling in from all department files because of users' access to shared documents? So this is kind of a scoping of your search and collection activity. Thoughts on that one, Rachi?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this in the last session. You know, a lot of it has to do with understanding the exact scoping and what you're searching, where you're searching. Obviously, if you're doing searching and, you know, for example, we have people who, you know, we'll have opposing counsel will come to us and say, hey, search for the word office. Well, that's going to bring up a lot. So, you know, it's a lot of it is just the lawyer's understanding and being able to negotiate. But one of the key points is that when we're using these tools, they can negotiate using real data. So when someone says, hey, search for the word Microsoft or search for the word Office or search for the word, you know, security, we're able to say, listen, we just did this, and, you know, we can come back to them 20 minutes later and say, if you do that search, it is going to result in 4.5 million items, and push back based off of the actual results, as opposed to just going in and saying, quote unquote, this is too broad. You know, you can use things like limiters with proximity searching and searching, you know, all kinds of complicated Boolean searching, which will obviously help you to help scope and limit the data as needed.
Great, great. And then there was one specific question we want to circle back to around how do you approach a specific folder in OneDrive, collecting just that specific folder?
Yeah, I actually posted the link to the documentation on that one earlier. So if that's in the chat, and it's the content search for targeted collections is the link to that one. But it does allow you to actually, it isn't as simple as we'd like it to be, hint, hint, Nick, product team, but it does allow you to run a script to identify the actual folder, or to actually, you know, use the actual URL in terms of being able to target specific folders within a OneDrive to only search or to only bring back and collect that data. We do that a lot, especially we don't really do it on the Exchange side so much, but we do it on the OneDrive side. And we will search it specifically to identify just a folder, or just search within a specific folder or subfolders within a site.
Great. Thank
okay.
You. Yeah.
Yep. So let's jump through the last couple of things that we have. Is just a couple of a quick case study, and then some of the features that we're really using. You know, this is just a quick case study that we had recently, which was a patent litigation. You can see that, you know, the original data set was over 700 gigs, 5.1 million emails. When we did the searching, we used the hit term reporting within the searching to be able to revise it, to come back, to look at the results, to do some sampling, and actually see what was coming back, and make determinations that the searches in some cases were too broad. In some cases, we also determined that you had to add in additional terms. And by the time we were done, we ended up with about 40,000 parent level items. Now, once that was done, that's parent level item means it's the email. An email with 3 attachments counts as 1 parent level item. So when it goes into the review set, it gets expanded. But as I said, not only does it get expanded to the email with the 3 attachments, but it'll also go through, if one of those attachments is a zip file, it'll extract everything in the zip file. And if anything has embedded objects or additional images or anything like that, it'll extract all of them out. So you can see that by the time it was done, it actually expanded it out almost to 1 million items. We were then able to, though, use all of the different filtering, the domain filters, sender analysis, recipient counts, all kinds of different additional keywords, things to be able to further filter down the data, get rid of non-relevant data that it hit on a keyword, but we could see right away from an eDiscovery and analysis perspective and working together with outside counsel, things that did not need to be reviewed by the attorneys in the review application. In this case, it was going into relativity. So what we did was we did all of this filtering, and we got it down to 45,000, almost 46,000 items that actually then went into review. So when you look at it from an export perspective, that was all the data that was exported out of the system, and the relevance rate within that data set was extremely high. So we were able to get it down from a really large volume to a much, much smaller volume and have that data reviewed all within a very short time period. So now let's look at a couple of the features on the next few slides. The first thing is, as I mentioned, there is the ability to do the custodian management, which includes the ability to see where a custodian has data. So for example, which SharePoint sites or which teams they're a member of. The custodian notifications, which we're not using today yet, but it is there. If you are not using a third-party tool today and you're using Excel or something like that to manage your hold notices, then this will work great as it is out of the box. If you're using one of the more advanced systems today, then you need to really truly evaluate whether it has everything yet, or whether the things on the roadmap that are coming will get it to the stage where it might be viable as a replacement. Next, if we click through, we can see the continue through there. The deep crawling and the indexing. So we talked a lot about this, the ability to do that deep processing, the higher size limits, the additional file types, the ability to really understand and remediate the data and get the list of the errors, not just that they are unindexed, but why they're unindexed. Are they too large? Are they file was malformed? Was it encrypted? You can get granular in terms of the reporting of what that data is and export out just what you need to. If we keep going through, then go ahead, Jen. Yep, the review and manage the case data. A lot of these things, again, we talked about in the first session, but some of the cool things, the ability to visualize the data and see data in different ways, see slicers that you're able to actually click on, and for example, the domains and being able to pick and choose which domains and see how many items hit on a different domain. So all of those things help you to get down to the real review set and the data that is actually going to be relevant, helps in the ECA part, and then the ability to also integrate in that non-Office 365 data that's been collected and run that through the same exact process, the same exact searches in order to have one streamlined process. And then if we click through again, then we can see on the analyze side, one more click, the ability to use the near duplication, the threading, themes, all of those things to help us to reduce the data volume, see things in context. We absolutely will only export out the things that are, unique data. So if I've got the email with, 7 replies, I'm only sending out the last reply unless something changed and there is unique data contained in one of the earlier ones, such as an attachment or someone changed the text within that data. So all of these things are really, really important. They're essential to what we're doing and how we're doing this. If we go to the next slide to kind of talk through, I think we talked enough about the cloud attachments in the first one, and we're running out of time. So let's go one more. Just some final thoughts. It's not an easy button. It does work, and you do have to put some thought into it, just like any other system. It's a tool, and as long as you're willing to look at it from a process-oriented approach, look at it from making sure that you have the right documentation, making sure that you understand what the system's doing, where the gaps are, what you need to do to overcome those gaps, either in the system itself or outside the system. it is able to be utilized in a way that will go ahead and allow you to do things in place in a way that will save you both time and money. But it does take effort. It's not just something that you can turn on and say, great, I'm good to go. So, you know, there's also one big thing is there's always new data types, new things that are coming out that need to be analyzed, that you need to understand. You need to do your own testing. Don't just rely on what you've heard or what other people are saying. Make sure that you understand how it's working in your specific environment and what you need to do in order to make sure that that data is processed and handled in a defensible manner, that you and your attorneys will be able to defend it and talk about it in the right way. So with that, I think we are just about out of time. I know that there's probably a number of questions, so I can stay a minute or two longer if anyone wants to answer some of the questions. Nick or Jen, if you saw anything that you think we should answer now. Okay.
Nothing from my side. Any questions, Nick, that you saw? I know you've been feeding them.
Yeah, I think we got a few of them. Yeah, I think we got some good ones. I'm sure there's some that we missed. Put a couple articles in the chat there that hopefully folks can look into. I don't know if there's any one specific jumping out that we want to share or to address at this point. Not from my side. I don't know, Jennifer, if you had any jump for you or Carolyn.
Well, I think we're at time. So what I'm going to do is, you know, take the list of outstanding questions, and we may just spend a bit of time over email hashing those out. Maybe we can do that, and then we'll provide some additional answers over email to the group, to the attendees when we send out the presentation, as well as a link to the session. So thank you very much to our panel of experts. This has been so interesting. Really great content covered in these two sessions. So we really appreciate your time. And thank you to all of our attendees as well for taking the time to attend our two sessions. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.